So, Rebecca, the winds are blowing, the trees are swaying, and you came blowing in the house.
Well, I've got my waxed cotton raincoat on and my ankle boots on and my fall sweater. Like we are Seattle people. Like, we are ready for this.
Yeah. Let's answer people's emails. What do you say?
Here we are. This is what we do.
Well, the first thing that people are asking a lot about is the Kanye anti-Semitic tweets.
So I pulled this from Instagram. I saw it on Speaking of Racism, which if you don't follow it, you should. And they got it from _heaven. And they had multiple slides, but these are the two ones I pulled. This is a quote. While anti-Semitism and anti-Blackness are not the same, there is a deep connection between them within white nationalism and hate movements. Commitment to building a whites-only nation holds both of those beliefs, right? You need to be both anti-Black and anti-Semitic. This belief creates a dynamic in which white nationalism use anti-Semitism as fuel for their anti-Blackness. Hate of non-Black people of color, xenophobia, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia. Like once one rears its head, the other one is usually not far behind. And, many people have said when Kanye said slavery was a choice, how come he didn't get canceled then? But Kanye goes against, makes anti-Semitic comments, he gets canceled pretty fast. So I think that dynamic is unfortunate. I wish, there's so many reasons to get rid of him. He's horribly abusive to his ex-wife, there are so many ways in which it shows that he does not use his power for good. He says, this is artistic, this is intellectual freedom, but if you watch him, he's just a horrible bully. And I think of in context, for this week, Leslie Jordan passed away, and there's someone who used their fame for good. And in their recovery, with their commitment to it's my job to be of service, what a different example of how to be in the world.
And, make no doubt about it, this kind of rhetoric can result to Jewish people being killed, murdered.
Oh, yeah.
Harmed.
I mean, how long does it take from Kanye's tweet? These signs come out on the 405 saying Kanye is right. Everything that's wrong with our country is because of the Jews. And these people are handing out pamphlets. So, I mean, if you are Jewish, you know that right under the surface is raging anti-Semitism. And I think for someone who's not of a oppressed group, you might be like, oh, no, it's not that bad. But this is how fast it happens. And I remember I had that same feeling, and I think I've talked about that again with the protests in Charlottesville, the white national gathering that happened there. And they're walking with the torches, and all of a sudden they're saying the Jews will not replace us. I'm like, okay, we're here already. I didn't think it was going to happen this fast, but here we are in raging fascism. So, okay.
Yeah. And I've heard people who don't really hold general racist attitudes spouting the propaganda of the anti-Semitic movement. We all understand that Jews are running the country. It's this semi-mainstream idea, right? Whereas if you said something like, we understand that Black people are lesser than white people. There's people who believe that, and there are circles where they'll say that sort of thing, but you wouldn't hear it over a sort of normal, polite conversation in Seattle, whereas anti-Semitic ideas I find to be strangely accepted and mainstream. And
there's this sense, too, of the Jews have power, the Jews have money, and that comes actually from the Middle Ages, where Christians were not allowed to touch money, and so Jews touched the money, and then...
and Jewish people weren't allowed to do other kinds of jobs.
Right, yeah. And there's also, I don't know if it's confirmation bias, what's the thing where if, there's 4 women in a room of 20 people, it feels like there's so many women in the room?
Mm-hmm.
And
there's probably a name for it.
And that, I think, really happens with Jews. it doesn't take many of us to be present for people to feel like, oh my God, we're in control of the entire show.
Right.
It's actually, this is the crazy part. Do you know what percentage of America is Jewish?
Depends on the area, obviously. If it's Manhattan, it's much higher. But if you're talking about the general United States, it's 3% or something.
Yeah. But this idea that we are so powerful, here's my theory on anti-Semitism, is that we hold on to these traditions that are super wacky. I mean, why shake your luvlav and your etrog? That was our last holiday. Why have a party for your holy book? We have, the Torah has a birthday celebration. Like, there's all these weird things that we do, and we've done them for 7,000 years. And it doesn't make any sense how they've tried to slaughter us so many times, and we still stick together and do these things. And I think that's one of the reasons people hate Black people as well, is that the community stays together no matter what level of oppression and genocide has occurred. And I think it terrifies waspy people. Like, I think it's just like, how can that be true? Why would anybody stick with these things? Why won't they assimilate into our way of being? Mm-hmm. Why do they keep their own ways? Mm-hmm. And I think Kanye just spouts, like, who knows what he's going to say next. I mean, he wears a White Lives Matter shirt to Fashion Week, hanging out with a really conservative Black news host. And then he does this 2 weeks later. He's a master at getting attention, for sure. But we all know that under that is very intense bipolar disorder. Mm-hmm. And, he's not well. He's really, really not well.
Yeah. People with bipolar, they're not necessarily racist, obviously.
So he's in a manic episode, which has a profound impact on how people act and are, and you feel invincible in a manic episode, and you feel like you're allowed to say anything because you're brilliant or you're closer to God or whatever. And so his behavior is out of the big bell curve of normal.
Mm-hmm, right.
But he has this platform that makes it sound like he can say whatever he wants.
Yeah. And people think he's a genius and da-da-da.
If I can't listen to his gospel album because of all of this, I'm going to be real, real upset.
I don't know about you, Rebecca, but I've had a number of clients who are very similar to what he's presenting. And I don't know if it's common to this demographic, but they are middle-aged men who have had bipolar, significant symptoms since they're 25 years old, because that's usually when it kind of starts to cross the threshold into pathology. And they've had spotty medication compliance. They've had very little therapy for a variety of reasons, very little insight-oriented, support-oriented, trauma-oriented therapy. And they have a lot of ideas and opinions, and they will ramble about it, and it won't make a lot of sense. And they seem like they feel non-confused and coherent, but they're not exactly coherent.
Well, and every time you go into a manic episode, or every time a schizophrenic person goes into a psychotic episode, there is brain degradation. The episodes get more and more intense as the person continues to be unmedicated. I mean, if you think of it like pulling a muscle over and over and over again, that muscle's just not going to bounce back.
Yeah. The other aspect that I think is present with these individuals is that they, even if they're medicated, will have ups and downs. And when any of us enter into a bad mood, we will have a different way of seeing the world and thinking, right? If you go through a bad mood with your partner, you will see your partner in a very negative light, right? And then you get in a better mood. And like for me, when I get in a bad mood and my dogs are annoying me, like it feels much worse than if I'm in a great mood and my dogs are being annoying. I love them. I'm just like, oh, that's so cute. But when I'm in a bad mood, it's like a lightning bolt to my core. And so I'll have that. But if we have a mood disorder, then we are, again, even medicated. We will have frequent moods of depression and mania that are filtering reality, and we're encoding memories as we're going, right? So you would have a lot of experiences where you feel like you're special, that you know it all from mania, and also depression where you feel like you're nothing, or the world is crap, or you're very angry and upset and frustrated with things. And then all those memories just get encoded. And so you could have 25 years by the time you're Kanye's age of, at half of that time, your mood is affecting the way that you're perceiving the world and yourself and life and everything. And then the next time you have a manic episode, all of these attitudes just kind of manifest itself. And that was what I would see, is that even when they weren't manic, these individuals would have these opinions. They would maybe spout them differently, but they were pretty bitter people. It's not like...
Well, the world sure didn't pan out as they planned. I mean, and in each of these episodes with someone who has way less resources than Kanye, more and more people get pushed away.
Yeah.
So their social circle gets pretty small, and they get pretty resentful watching other people have successes or maintain relationships or be with, partners who aren't, making them feel so distracted and overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So the world gets pretty dark.
Yeah. Now, I will say that this is just one profile of individual with bipolar. I've had other clients that had bipolar that took their meds, complied with treatment, and had no symptoms of bipolar as long as they were being medicated. So there's that profile. There are other profiles as well. But anyway, yeah, it's really unfortunate. Every time this sort of thing happens, I mean, I'm guessing for you, it's like, well, I live with this all the time and it doesn't feel great, but I know about it. But for me, I'm just like, really, people at 2022, we're still in the dark ages, literally.
And they've got those pamphlets ready to go. They've got that sign made up. They've got their phone list ready, and they're like, woohoo, strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah.
Kanye just thought what we thought. I mean, that's what's really intense about anti-Semitism, is that person may not express that opinion, but famous person says, hey, green light on anti-Semitism, and they're like ready to go.
Yeah. And
spout that stuff.
The most evil government and fascist of all time is Hitler. Is if you just read the tagline, it was anti-Semitism, and then people want to align themselves with him. They're given like the Nazi salute and this. And I'm just like, I just don't understand.
Well, it's about othering. It's about finding power in not being what is seen as weak. And
so many other ways to do it, though.
Have I told you my Coeur d'Alene story? Coeur d'Alene?
No.
Okay. So for those
every summer I would go to Coeur d'Alene.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, in the 80s and probably still now, Idaho was a hotbed of white nationalism, probably still is today, especially
the Northwest headquarters of KKK is on Hayden Lake.
Yes, in the Panhandle. Yeah. So I just gone to the Michigan Women's Festival, may it rest in peace, which was an all-women's gathering for a week in Michigan. And I was making my way back in a car full of lesbians. One of them had never been to the Northwest before, and she was a French scholar. And she kept saying, Coeur d'Alene. We'd see these signs. She's like, I can't wait to get to Coeur d'Alene. And I couldn't even understand what she was saying, and it made no sense. And we stopped in Coeur d'Alene. That's how you pronounce it here, Idaho. There were at least 4 lesbians get out of the truck or get out of the car, and we just get like screamed at. Like, fucking dykes, get back in the car. And I looked at her and I was like, oh, welcome to Coeur d'Alene. So for me, like, where does the anti-Semitism end and the homophobia begin? And it's all...
Yeah. We went there every summer, and I can't remember...
As a mixed family.
Yeah. And my dad, I remember... we were going into town because we would stay on, it was my mom who's white. Her parents had a property on on Hayden Lake. And I can't remember if the KKK headquarters, in my head, it was on Hayden Lake, just around the corner from this summer cabin, but it could have been on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Anyway, when we would rarely go into town because we would stay at the cabin, but we would occasionally go in town. My dad would sit us down, and I'll never forget, I was probably like 7 years old, and he's saying, so we're about to go into town, and he's telling all of his kids, and there might be violence, there might be a fight, and I just want to prepare you for that because daddy's gonna throw down with these assholes, kind of a thing. Because my dad was not, he wasn't gonna take it, and he was used to that kind of thing. And he would have been in his mid-30s at the time. So, he would...
A strapping lad.
Yeah, I'll never forget that. I was just like... And it was scary. I remember just being terrified. I thought, why are we going then? Why are we going into this town? And to my memory, nothing happened. But anyway.
Yeah. But those are, that's the conversation I should have had with my friend. Like, oh.
Well, did they just look at you? They just knew.
They just knew. We didn't look like feminine, straight women. And what's really funny is we just spent a week with no restraints about what being female-bodied meant. And so here's our first interaction with the outside world. And it's like, oh,
How many people were yelling?
In my memory, there was 2, but there could have been more. And there were 4 of us, but it was like, we had to pee, but it was like, get back in the car, we'll pee later.
Oh my God, yeah. Forget about, yeah.
Yeah, like suddenly I don't have to pee. Like,
so they're yelling close by?
Oh, it's like a parking lot, and, we get out, and they're like...
It's like a gas station?
I don't know where we were. This is like... I'm 21 in this memory, so this is like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I have a friend who was there. I'll see if she remembers this story.
This is during the first George Bush administration.
Right. This was decades ago. We got out of the car. These guys are in a truck next to us. They get out of their truck and just start screaming homophobic, sexist comments at us. And I was like, okay, yeah. Like, and that's how much, when you are...
You just got out of the car.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so this is being gay in the early 90s. There's a kind of a uniform. I'm sure we have gay haircuts and gay clothes, but they knew it. They, and maybe they yelled this at every woman filled car. I don't know. But this is called being clocked in the gay world, when you are called out for your gender presentation or your sexuality presentation.
Clocked?
Yeah.
Like cold clocked?
Like clocked.
Or like, cold cocked. That's
no. So clocked is like when you don't pass as whatever.
Hetero. Cis. You
got clocked. We got clocked real fast in Coeur d'Alene in 1992. Probably still today, it's the same.
Yeah.
But,
That's why, I know people get upset at me, but I just want to secede. I know people get upset at me. They're just like, but Kirk, I live in Arkansas, and that feels like you're abandoning me. And I'm just like, our life would, because, there are things that happen in other countries, and I'm not happy about it. Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia or, I don't know, whatever, Russia, there's things that happen. And, I'm not excited, but it feels less home to me. It feels like, let's do what we can, but it feels more distant or something. And if we just had Pacifica, the West Coast of
Cascadia.
And I always say this,
Canada, we're ready.
There would be no opposition, right? The eastern side of Washington State, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, all those states, they would cheer. They would build a wall for us. Let's take a break because I can't.
Adios mio.
All right, we're back from the break. Let's do an OPP. We have Simon from Dublin. We have Jocelyn from Sandusky, Ohio. Pia from Stockholm, Sweden. Megan from Seattle. Francisca, annual more deserving listener from Zurich. Phi from Surrey, British Columbia. Jessica from Shoreline, Washington, just north of here. Tiffany from God knows where. Tempest from Massachusetts. Aaliyah from Madrid, Espanol. Upper tier patron Nicole from California. Katie from North Carolina, Lauren from Georgia, upper tier patron Jennifer from Iowa, Andrew from God knows where, Sophia from Lisbon, Portugal, Dr. Talia from Toronto, Lenny from Czech Republic, I believe, Nick from God knows where, Sonia from CZ. What's CZ?
Czechoslovakia.
Chechnya.
Oh, Chechnya.
But Czechoslovakia...
What's Czechoslovakia?
But Czechoslovakia, it doesn't exist anymore.
That's doesn't?
No, CH is Switzerland. I always forget that. Rachel from Beaverton, Oregon.
Beaverton!
Floor, Heather,
My
and
cousins are there.
Melissa from God knows where, and Kelly from Belmont, Michigan. Thank you for being a patron through thick and thin for over 2 years.
So when I need to build myself up, one of the ways I introduce myself is I say, I am a monthly guest on an internationally known podcast.
Oh, when you're introducing yourself at a conference or something?
Or just at a dinner party.
To your family, you just walk in and say... Patron Audrey has a question. A friend of mine began using birth control for the first time earlier this year. For context, she only had ever been diagnosed with generalized anxiety after 3 years of therapy and psychiatric care. So at this time, when she's prescribed birth control, she only had generalized anxiety. But this year, her and our friend group realized she had become majorly depressed and for the first time in her life began self-harming, all without any clear reasons or triggers. Finally, she found research on her new birth control and came across countless women experiencing the same depressive episodes and suicidal, self-harming tendencies. Women who've never had these thoughts before, having this specific brand. We don't want to knock birth control or contraception at all, but it makes me wonder how we can properly educate ourselves on the mental side effects of the pill. My friend had a hard time reaching out for help because, from her understanding, the pill made her so depressed and reclusive that she couldn't figure out how to ask for help. From what we gathered, it doesn't seem like this side effect was made apparent to the consumers, so it's left us questioning everything. We're feeling very confused, discouraged, and hurt for my friend who's really suffered this year. Rebecca, what do you think?
Yeah, women's health is a black hole. I mean, nothing that is prescribed to women in any way is necessarily tested enough, and the side effects are not taken seriously. Put on top of that, if it's prescribed to a woman of color, she is, I think, 75% more likely to be poo-pooed. So the idea that a major medication for women would have horrible side effects that no one talked about, Sadly, I'm not surprised. And I think another example of that from when we were this age was the Norplant. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. It was supposed to be this panacea for women. It ended up having horrible side effects and scarred people severely in trying to take it out. Mm. So I'm sorry this happened. And there's been a very long history of things being prescribed to women that are not great for women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In addition to this, I have found that physicians, and there's various different levels of this issue, that they are, one, kind of afraid to talk about these kinds of things for whatever reason, because our society is. Two, overworked and
right, you have 15 minutes.
Yeah, cranking out the patients. And there's this is just my perception, and again, there's a lot of variability among physicians regarding this, that they operate from a place of like, well, I'll tell them the most likely scenario, and I'm not going to mention all the random unlikely scenarios because I don't have time to, or it's not likely. But that doesn't take into account the possibility of someone literally dying because of suicide and depression. And it also doesn't take into consideration that the nature of the symptom, of the side effect, is so serious that you should really be telling everyone. Also, they figure you're going to read that thing they shove at you
massive,
at the pharmacy or something, that it's up to you to read it or something. Also, there are obviously dubious practices among medications and the companies, the corporations that are trying to make money and will downplay those kinds of things or even try to gin up the research to refute these kinds. Anyway, point is that I have found, as I get older and I utilize the medical system more, that I have to basically become my own case manager and kind of my own research assistant to the physicians, because if I don't, it's just not going to happen. I'm sure, my doctors, they care, and I see that, but I get the impression that they literally just don't have the time.
Or, like, I'll just give an example that's something that happened to me, I guess it was about 5 years ago. I can't remember what it was, but from my post-traumatic stress from my childhood, I have nightmares probably every night.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. We can have a whole podcast on...
Still?
Yeah.
Every night?
Almost every night. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so I told this once to a male doctor, and he was like, oh, there's this medication, and they've tested it out on veterans, Vietnam veterans, and the nightmares went away. And I was like, well, that would be a relief. Let me try it.
What was the med?
I can't remember, but it made me have to pee like so much. And, you know, that was one of the random things in that huge massive pamphlet.
I'm guessing it didn't work, but did it work?
I can't remember if I didn't have nightmares or not, because the having to pee became such an issue in my life. And then they were like, well, we have this other med for this. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go back to the nightmares and take myself off this medication. And I was very curious, like, had they tested this medication on perimenopausal women? Probably not. So I just, you know, I made my own call. People want a special episode on my nightmares. Maybe we should have patrons want a special nightmare episode. I can go through all the tropes of my nightmares.
Yeah.
There are, yeah. So, you know, something like not as bad as what happened to this woman, but you know, I had to make my own call, and the doctor was like, yeah, but you're not having nightmares, which I must have not been having nightmares. But I was like, yeah, having to pee every 10 minutes it's not working. Not working. I mean, so things you can do are do the research. This person did tremendous self-advocacy. Yeah. Thank you to her friends for stepping in.
Right.
Get a second opinion, go to another doctor. I mean, there's so many birth control medication options. I'm wondering if like a different one would be better.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard though, because I imagine for people, they don't know where they're supposed to go. And so they end up on Facebook and their aunts and uncles are spouting all this crap. And so what I would say is to find a scientifically oriented individual that, like a friend, or like, I guess this is a tip. If you ever run across an acquaintance who understands how to research things and knows where to go for quality information and how to detect bad information, it can be hard to even figure that out.
Well, there are some great, I mean, the National Institute of Health is a great place to check out.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's go on. You, up at your patron, Jasmine from Idaho, speaking of, says, can you talk about the long-term emotional strain and the association with physical pain? For instance, when I'm under periods of extended anxiety, etc., I get muscle and joint aches. Or when I am in an intensely uncomfortable situation and I feel I'm unable to either retreat or change the situation, I'll actually feel like my skin is raw and any physical touch to my arms is actually painful. The first aches take a while to come on and a while to go away, but the second seems to come on quickly and subside quickly once I'm able to get to a place of emotional safety. Or maybe not safety so much as to be outside direct confrontation with a stressful situation. Rebecca, what do you think about that?
So this is vagus nerve stuff. This is Bessel van der Kolk. I always forget. The body keeps the score or the body holds the score?
I think keeps. Okay,
the body keeps the score. So our body has its own response to trauma and stress and strife. And so, yeah, there are physical symptoms that go along with all of these mental health issues. You know, there's often stomach aches. So of blessed memory, Seattle icon, Nirvana frontman...
Kirk Cobain?
Kirk Cobain is a famous example. He had chronic stomach aches his entire life. He also had stomach and addiction issues. Like, these things go hand in hand. And
trauma.
And trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have the research in front of me, but from my understanding, a lot of chronic lower back pain is often alleviated by psychotherapy, stress management, emotional regulation, because a lot of times these individuals they'll take pain meds, and of course that you build a tolerance to, and there are of course side effects to that, or they'll seek surgery, which can go horribly wrong and is only, from what I understand, maybe effective. You know, there's like a minority of people that actually go through the surgery of like fusing a set of vertebrae, to have it be effective. And what they found was that a lot of people, if they go to therapy and they have stress reduction and trauma treatment, then for a pretty large percentage, then their lower back pain goes away. So Yeah, our mind is of the body and the body is of the mind. And so when we have, and our emotions are of the body as well. And so the trauma is of the body and the suffering is of the body, which includes the mind. So yeah, absolutely.
And that's one of the first assessments I'll do with people is where do you hold your stress and continuing to work on relaxing that place.
Anonymous patron says, while healing from a string of bad luck with mental health, I've picked up some part-time work in an attempt to feel more normal. I experience PTSD flashbacks. Based on past awful experiences and disclosing health information at the workplace, I've decided for my own well-being to never disclose to management or other coworkers about my mental health issues. Sometimes when I have one flashback, then I will have a string of them in a day or week, so I worry it could mildly affect my performance at work. I have reached a point in healing where I am able to cope enough so that flashbacks appear as if I'm zoning out at worst. However, I am still training, and I am concerned if this happens frequently enough, others may take notice and either worry or think I am incompetent at my job. I feel I may be overly self-critical because nobody has remarked on it to me about this, but my past experiences make me want to prepare ahead of time. So what can I say in case someone does want to have a health-related conversation with me? My coworkers are kind, but I want to avoid inappropriate emotional intimacy and protect my privacy. When the topic of mental health comes up in the workplace, how can someone diplomatically explain their needs without getting into specifics? Rebecca, what do you think?
Well, I would start with someone that you trust more than others. You know, I often say 1 in 2 Americans would qualify for an anxiety diagnosis right now. So just kind of normalizing that it happens. And just, it sounds like you know really well what your presentation is. So you could say, you may see me from time to time, my eyes kind of glaze over and I'm staring into space, and you know, just give me a minute. I know I'm doing it, and I'll come back. And you don't have to say why until you feel like there is trust there. I mean, we've podcasted on trauma dumping in the past. I think I've noticed people get overwhelmed when you head into the details. But if you can just give what's called like an elevator speech, a short synopsis of what people might see on the surface, and then if it's appropriate over time, you know, you might get into more details after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to know. I would say anecdotally, the percentage of people that would just, regardless of how you approached it, that they would be negative against you and degrade your experience at work, I think that's a pretty small percentage. They're there. But I think there's a large percentage of people that are terrified of making a mistake. They're mainly narcissistic. It's sort of like when you tell someone that you're going through something difficult or you lost someone in your life, someone died. Most people, when they are reacting badly to grief, it's because they're so self-centered about making a mistake that they just want to avoid the whole thing. Anyway, there's a lot of topics in our society currently that are kind of like that. And if you can hand them a protocol on a platter, then they will feel relaxed enough to engage their heart, which they want to help you. People want to help. They want to care. They don't want to be dicks. They have empathy. They have compassion. And then there's another group of people who might be like, oh my God, me too.
Yeah.
Because I almost can guarantee you have coworkers that are the same. So, or at least in a similar category. So if you felt like you really wanted, because of course you don't have to disclose for your own well-being and to preserve your job, you could tell them, like Rebecca said, just a very brief synopsis, but also hand them, you could even laminate cards and say, this is what I need you to do, and it'll only last X amount of minutes, and there's no emergency. You know, I'm not going to die. It's just that I'll get a little zoned out for a bit, and I just need to be able to get to a safe place emotionally and physically, and then everything will be fine. And what I need you to do is just not flip out.
Right.
And also maybe help me to go back to my office, which is kind of my safe, or whatever and
or get me a glass of water.
Yeah.
I've seen that a bystander will get very anxious and pepper people with questions, not understanding that that client or that person can't hear those questions, and those questions are kind of stacking up like a log jam. So I would just say it's okay to just be quiet and sit side by side with someone until they're in a better space.
Yeah. And if you did that and things went well, which they probably would if you handed it on a silver platter, you're giving them a gift in a lot of ways. You're not putting them out, because they will go home and tell their spouse how awesome they were with their coworker who has trauma. People want to be helpful, and if they can have a situation where they are helpful, it'll make their week. Really, they'll feel so proud of themselves that they were a good coworker, that they were a good person. People want to do those things, but if they don't know how and they're freaking out, then they will start to, go to their defensive structures, which can involve attacking you or ostracizing you or labeling you negatively or something. So, that's what I would say. Another tactic that I would say is absolutely possible, and as I say this, I'm like, well, I don't necessarily recommend it, but then I say, well, this is probably what I would do, is I would just make up a different story and say that I had a condition neurologically that was kind of like ADHD or something, and then every once in a while I'll zone out for 5 minutes. And it's not, that's all that it is. It's just something that I've always had when I was young. It's sort of like dyslexia. You're talking to like the general public. So you're just like, it's just sort of like a zone out thing that I do. And all I need to do is just kind of recenter and everything will be okay.
Well, I also feel like now with COVID, you can just say...
Long COVID.
Well, you can just say, hey, the last couple years have been real hard for me. That's something everyone can understand.
Yeah.
And you can say, I've just developed this weird coping strategy where I just kind of space out.
Yeah.
And I'll be back. I mean, I don't know anyone whose behavior is exactly what it was 3 years ago. Yeah. I have so many weird tics and strange things, and going to the grocery store for me is now epic. And there's times where I will just get my grocery delivered because I just can't tolerate being in the grocery store. Even though no one recognizes I'm not going to have any social interactions. There's just like the amount of people. What's another one?
And the possible infections?
It's not even, it's really social phobia at this point. It's just like there's a lot of people. Here's an example of something that happened to me today. There's a lot of driveways in my neighborhood that people act as if no one else would ever be out on the street. And they come flying out of their driveway super, super fast. And this morning I was already stressed out, and this neighbor who I don't know comes flying out of her driveway and practically crashes into me. And I honk at her and I stop, and it takes me a while to recenter, to the point that she's looking at me and waving are you okay? And I'm thinking, lady, I'm not okay. My startled response just got set off. And I can't smile back and wave. I have been triggered by your unsafe driving, and it's going to take me a minute. Or I'll have panic attacks in parking lots now, the space, in Seattle, I'm talking to you, PCC. The Union parking lot in a station wagon is...
what do you mean, Union?
They've got a new PCC on Union and 23rd.
Oh.
And it's a micro store. It's it doesn't have everything. It's very cute. They have lots of snacky food. And the parking lot is tight, tight, tight.
Yeah.
And I had a full-on panic attack in the parking lot, trying to get into the parking space.
Yeah. I just want to rant about this because there are civil engineers and architects who went to school long periods of time. There are tolerances for cars that are well understood, especially in America when you have these potentially
enormous
bigger cars. And
mine is not a huge car.
Right. But your car's bigger than a Fiat, you know what I mean?
Right, yes.
If you're in Italy or France or something, it's a different kind of normalized car size kind of thing. Anyway, but when they are designing these things, the parking lot, they spend thousands upon thousands of dollars just on the design portion, especially if it's a parking lot that's kind of unique, right? But even these parking garages are also, you know, you spend a lot of money. And at some point they sit down and go, okay, if we make the spots this big, we will only be able to fit X amount of cars. But if we scrunch in the spots, we'll be able to fit, you know, 13% more cars. And what they're thinking, and maybe the client or someone comes in and says, well, we want more capacity because we want more customers, because we want more money. And then you and I try to fucking park in these tiny little spots, and it completely ruins any enjoyment or you know, when you're going to the store, sometimes you're just hoping for neutral, you know, just like it went okay. But you can't find a spot that will accommodate your car. Or I've parked in certain lots in Seattle where, and you know, I'll be in a medium-sized car or a bigger car, it doesn't really matter. And the car next to me is parked exactly in the middle of their parking spot. You know, they're not askew. And I'm in the exact middle of my parking spot, and I can't open the door. I have to crawl out through the trunk. That is a design problem.
Yeah.
And when, especially in Seattle, when you're just begging for a parking spot, sometimes you don't have a choice. Beggars can't be choosers, and you're scrambling because you're a little late anyway. And so it's not like you can say, well, do I pay a little extra for the bigger spots? There's no opportunity for that. You just have to take what you can get. And
well, so let me just say, 3 years ago, the amount of times I could count on one hand as my entire times as a driver, the amount of times I'd had a panic attack in a parking lot. Now it is, I wouldn't say unlikely every time I go out. That
I don't think I knew you had panic attacks.
I get panicky.
Because, you know, I had
they're way up. They're way up since COVID. Like, I wouldn't say before COVID, I would be like
panic or anxiety attacks. Because in my
what's the difference?
Well, so panic. I had panic attack
I'm not
disorder.
Worrying about the future.
Huh?
I'm not.
No, like. Well,
Here we go.
I don't know. This will be educational,
Two
and maybe next time.
About what is a panic attack?
Well, next time we need to do an episode on Rebecca's issues, I guess, will be the thing. Because I mean, if you're willing to talk about it, I didn't know, and I'm sorry that you're going through this, and have since I've known you, and way before, and that
it's way worse now. It wasn't this bad when we used to hang out.
So I had actual panic disorder when I was younger, and in part that's was an influence on why I became a therapist, because I was really in my own isolated, stupid way trying to figure out what was wrong with me, and really had no guidance, or internet didn't exist. So anyway, what a panic attack was for me and for people with panic is that it can often come on randomly. It can be triggered sometimes, but it was something that would come on often randomly, sometimes biologically triggered, which I won't go into, but the point is that, so I've experienced both. I've had anxiety attacks where, like, let me describe an anxiety attack. The biggest anxiety attack I had, ironically, was the day before I had to teach for the very first time 25 years ago. Paul David coerced me into teaching, and I'm glad he did, because I needed to be pushed, but he kind of cornered me and sort of tricked me into doing it, and I agreed to it because I just wanted to please him, and I was so intimidated, and it felt like a good opportunity. But if he had asked me if I wanted to, I would have said no. I just graduated 3 weeks ago. I'm not qualified to teach to these people who I was just in class with 3 weeks ago, and they're all older than me. I don't know what I'm doing. But he believed in me, and so he pushed me anyway. So I agreed to it. And the night before, I'm pacing around my apartment, literally just back and forth, because I had been working on my notes to teach. And I started to flip out because I'm like, I'm going to make a fool out of myself. It's not going to go right. And I can't think straight, and I'm pacing, and I'm freaking out, and I have high anxiety, and I'm distressed, and my adrenaline is pumping, and I just want out, and I want to run away physically from the whole situation. And I'm about to call him on my phone to say, yeah, sorry, I can't do this. And that lasted, probably 45 minutes. And eventually I picked up the phone and I was just about to call him. And I had this kind of why in the road, and I had enough oomph or something to just be like, no, Kirk, do it. You can do this. You can do this. And then I started to kind of come down from that anxiety attack. So that's what I would call an anxiety attack. But a panic episode, it is a very different experience. It is all encompassing, and not every panic attack is the same for people, but I'll tell you the version of mine. My brain, it's like a whole other state that I had a panic attack that lasted like 48 hours, and it never relented. It was just high, almost like I'm on acid or something. It's a very weird, it's terrifying. It's absolutely just horrifically terrifying and confusing, but so much anxiety that I can't even really perceive the world straight. Every sense, hearing and vision and touch, everything is like intense but muted at the same. It's hard to describe. It's semi-dissociative in a sense, but it's not that. And all I can do in those situations is pace. Like, I'll just tell you one and then I'll shut up, is that I had a panic attack.
What about my panic attack?
I had a panic attack while I was camping one time. And in the middle of the night, I was sleeping and I woke up in the middle of it. So that's what I mean. It wasn't like I was triggered. I just woke up in the middle of a panic attack, and all I could do, and we were in the middle of nowhere and there was no light. So it was pitch black. I couldn't see, literally, I could not see my hand in front of my face. I groped around in the darkness until I found this picnic table, and I walked around the picnic table for 4.5 hours.
Wow.
And just in high panic, and just like, because I knew by that point that if I just sort of wrote it out, eventually it would go away. It didn't feel good, obviously, but in that state, I feel like I need to move. I need to run. And sometimes I would also run. Sometimes I would just like put on my running shoes and I'd just start running through the neighborhood and in circles, and it didn't feel great, but it felt like it felt worse to just be sitting there staring at the wall, So I'm not describing it very well, but so it's different to me.
In mine, I can describe it now as I know my frontal cortex goes completely offline. So if I can't park in the spot and my blood pressure starts going through the roof, and I realize my cognitive skills are like declining rapidly, I'm not going to be able to figure it out. So this is one thing in a partnership, my spouse would say like, just get it together and figure it out. And I didn't have the words until now to be able to say like, there is no brain to turn on. Only animal brain.
Yeah.
Must leave parking lot.
Yeah. Kill anyone in my way.
And then once I get home, all I can do is go to sleep. So that is Yeah,
that sounds, at the very least, that sounds worse than my anxiety attack. You know what I mean? I consider anxiety attacks to just be like severe nerves. The way however nervous you're about to go on stage or something along those lines, your body will start kind of reacting, and if you times that by 10, that's an anxiety attack. But a panic attack, is a really like specific thing. Anyway, point is we need to do an episode where we explore all this. But let's take a break.
I can't wait to tell you about my dreams.
Yeah. Let's take a break, and when we get back, let's answer a couple more questions. What do you say, Rebecca? Let's go to a couple questions here. This next one is directly for you, Rebecca.
Oh.
From annual patron Soft Noodles.
Soft Noodles. We have a relationship.
On Discord.
Yes.
They say, I would love to hear Rebecca's comments on the possible role of art in the following categories.
Oh, Lord, it's this question. We skated this question last time.
Okay. The role of art in trauma recovery, Rebecca, what?
So I think of the famous Winston Churchill quote, where during World War II, they are still fully funding the arts in the UK. And someone asks him, why are you doing that? Why don't you give all the money to your armed forces? We're at war. Your country could be decimated. And he says, what are we fighting for if we don't have our arts? So much of what we see now, you saw it in the pandemic. I'll pull on Leslie Jordan again. Like, the arts save us in our trauma. The arts bond us in our trauma, and then those traumas become our stories. Ring Around the Rosie, myths from all over the world, the Bible. Those are all traumatic stories that have been condensed and distilled, and we tell each other to learn lessons.
I never thought about Ring Around the Rosie being in that light.
It is a song about the last plague.
But that's interesting. Okay, so
Let me just give one more example, which I've been talking a lot lately with my clients, is that many people are feeling like, oh my God, end of days, the ends are among us. And so I've been collecting end of days stories. Titanic is a classic example, but also really thinking about Noah's Ark is an end of days story. Who do you want on your ark with you? Who would you take with you? You know, if you say Noah's Ark, almost, I don't know, anyone that I know, an image appears. Like there are these ways in which these images, these songs are just part of the collective unconscious, and they hold us together. And they're instant ways for us to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The role of art in developing a sense of self, Rebecca.
Well, let's go back to Kurt Cobain. That, primarily, so in art, the teenage years are called the gang stage, and you are pulling from your peers who are the same age, and everybody draws the same way, or you can quickly identify each other by how you dress, or what music you listen to, or what movies or podcasts you like. And sorry, everyone, I just burped. And so we define ourselves visually. And, when we came up, I mean, the way you said who you were was your grungy ass plaid shirt that you bought at the thrift store and your ripped up jeans, and everybody knew exactly who you were and the type of music that you listened to. And so it's very important in identity formation. It's how we claim our tribes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The role of art in activism.
My favorite. I mean, so many activist movements have the art that goes along with them. So I think of ACT UP, which was addressed HIV, AIDS, non-action in the late 80s and mid 90s. And it was their visual stuff. If you look up ACT UP now, you'll see how much that influence of that style still proliferates today. But I think every important movement, the peace movement, every important movement has an artistic or musical component to it. And especially music, these are the ways we teach each other the lessons of the time. So songs like If I Had a Hammer, teach that you can have an impact on the world. And that song has been sung for so many times through so many movements. Or if we think about like what's happening now in the Mideast with women and men reclaiming their power against the government, there's so many visual images that come out of that. The picture of the woman who was murdered by police, like these images define that movement. Everybody, when they see her picture, knows exactly what's being talked about. Mm-hmm. Ooh, another example is, have we talked about Little Amal?
I don't know.
So there is a puppeteer who created a 9-foot-tall puppet that's operated by one person inside and 2 people for the hands. And in order to bring attention to Syrian refugees, that puppet, those 3 people, walked from Syria through Turkey, through Greece, took a boat, went to Italy, all the way up through Italy, France. I think they went other places in England. And then they just were in New York for a while. But it's been one of the most prolific art moments for me, of the last decade, that like art teaches us. You just have to see Little Amal and you're like, right, refugee children. And they take her now, like they just took her to Poland to interact with Ukrainian refugees. Like, art is magic, and it's where the movement happens. And it's the long lasting impact. And there's a great movie about this called No, which is the story of the visual ads that were created in a South American country that was trying to overthrow their dictator. And these visual statements, we'll never forget them.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the oil protesters throwing soup on Van Gogh.
What do you think about Lil Nas throwing Van Gogh at the soup made by Andy Warhol? I mean, I think it's of its time, right? These paintings only have value because of what we've projected upon them. And here are these people saying these objects shouldn't exist. These objects won't exist if climate chaos continues. So I'm going to take it out now. I think it's very provocative. And art has always, and activism has always been provocative. I don't want anyone to destroy beautiful pieces of art, but I understand what they're up to. They get a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. You know, why is that painting worth $10 million?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know if this was a retroactive claim, but they said that they knew that these paintings had glass protective covers, and thus the only thing that would maybe be kind of, a little bit of smuts would be on the frame and not the actual piece of art.
So, but think about art activism in the other way. Think about all of these statues of Columbus that have been torn down, or other, here in the States, other Confederate statues. I mean, that's another way of activism, right? Is to say this sculpture no longer gets to hold public space. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what I'll say is that we have a problem with our usage of oil, not only just in terms of the environment, but in terms of social justice and economics and exploitation of humans. And it's obvious, and we have government subsidies around the world that are contributing to this. We have literal wars and soldiers dying and propaganda and all sorts of stuff. And for someone to try to raise awareness about that in the various ways that people do is obviously highly commendable. Also, for them to maybe stand on a corner with a picket sign, they will get absolutely zero attention. There will be no media attention. So the only way to get any attention is if you do something that has a story to it. And one of the things that the news media or the internet and Twitter will actually pay attention to things is if there's something that people will get upset about. And if you stand in a corner and say, we're using too much oil, or our governments are corrupt with oil, people will drive by and maybe they'll be like, oh, I don't agree or something, but you're not inconveniencing them. You have to bother people in order for them to actually pay attention. And this is kind of a genius move if they did know that it wasn't actually going to harm anything, because the initial internet reaction was, look how stupid these people are. That was the mainstream reaction, and it still kind of is. But that's the genius of this, is that if every person that reposts this is like, look how stupid these people are, the message, although, some people would say, well, you're making the message look stupid. And I would say maybe, but I remember people reacting this way to Black Lives Matter when it first came out. It's hard to really remember this, but I remember it fully, that for years, Black Lives Matter was considered to be a joke. The mainstream internet, even among young people on Reddit and stuff, anecdotally anyway, they would make fun of Black Lives Matter. They thought they were ridiculous, entitled young people. And of course now it's mainstream. There are still people that think it's ridiculous, but it's become mainstream because of the actions of people in that phase where they will do things that possibly will bother others. Like, I remember when Bernie Sanders came to Seattle and two Black Lives Matter activists interrupted him in the middle of his campaign speech, and the optics of it was complicated because some people were like, well, you should be protesting the Republican. You're making it look like you're against Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is on your side. And there was a mixed reaction, but at the same time, if they didn't do that, if they just stood to the side and said, can we please, here's a pamphlet or something, it's not talked about enough, Well, and so I'm late to the third season of Pose. I finally got to watch it, and they reproduce in that episode people bringing the ashes of their loved ones who've died of AIDS to the residence of the New York City mayor of the time and spilling those ashes
on the steps of the mayor's residence. And it's this incredibly powerful. And I think there's actually, they bring in a dead body to lie on the steps. You know, I mean, these are outrageous acts, but people are pushed to do these things. You know, is that art? Is that activism? Is that okay? Is that an incredibly memorable moment that really says we've lost all these people and city mayor, you know, I mean, these are powerful moments.
Yeah, because to me, if you do the normal, respectable, acceptable route of protests, which people have been doing for decades for a variety of efforts, you don't get anything done. You have to do something. You have to get the attention. And so...
And that's why Little Amal is so brilliant. I mean, it's this 9-foot tall girl, clearly brown skin, brown hair, who doesn't speak. And the message is so powerful. You can't deny it. If people want to see it, she was on The View. Whoopi Goldberg brought her on The View. And it's just, it's, you know, art is beyond everyday speech. It leaves a lasting impression. Destroying art also leaves a lasting impression. You know, Banksy is famous for being an art provocateur, and he did this, we don't know who Banksy is, did this famous piece where it's auctioned off for like $1 million, and as soon as it's auctioned off, they press this button and the art piece goes through a shredder and the piece is shredded. So, you know, I mean, these are...
And now it's worth, I think, even more than $1 million, by the way, even though it's half shredded.
I love it!
Yeah. Because, you know, of the Banksy art pieces, that might be the most famous at this point, you know. All right. The role of art in education.
Oh. So children learn so much better when the arts are present. They learn math so much better when they get to play music.
So asterisk on that math thing, when I first started to write music, I remember visually going to the same place I went to when I was learning calculus.
Yeah. So, and then if you want to retain students, bring in the arts. Like there's all these examples of in predominantly Latinx high schools, if you start a mariachi band, attendance increases because people see themselves reflected and their culture reflected and their arts are reflected, and it's a way to celebrate themselves. So without the, God, I'm trying to imagine my experience, elementary school through high school, without the arts.
Well, what about you as a professor? When you were teaching, did you use art?
Completely arts-based. Anybody who's ever taken a class with me, it's like 20% content, 80% your arts-based learning.
How do you use it?
Magic. So, you know, I teach the lesson. So here's a classic example of how I would teach art therapy and addiction. Is I would give the classic addiction lecture, and then I would hand out pipe cleaners. And I would say to everyone, make something wearable with these pipe cleaners. It can go anywhere on the top half of your body because we need to see it as you're talking about it. And so then you've got 20 people making like pipe cleaner hats, pipe cleaner glasses, whatever, bangles, who knows what. And then when you look around the room, it looks awfully silly, right? Because everybody's got these pipe cleaner things, and everybody talks a little bit about their pipe cleaner piece of art. And then I do the punch, where I teach the lesson, which is when I say when you're working in addiction recovery, most people can't imagine having fun and not being high. And so this is a great directive to do, because while they're sharing, everybody's giggling at everybody else. And I'll say, when was the last time you had fun without using drugs or alcohol? And I've had clients in groups say, this was the last/first time I've had fun without using drugs and alcohol. So it's art-based learning, but also the lesson is within the art itself.
Yeah, that's powerful. The role of art in community.
God, what is art? I mean, when I think of the best experiences I've had, it's been enjoying art, either creating art in community, or like I just got to see Elton John's last world tour show at the Tacoma Dome, which is this massive venue. I don't know how many people it holds, like tens of thousands, a lot.
40,000.
40,000 people.
Yeah.
And there is one man, one 75-year-old man on stage playing, giving 110% at every song. And we are all singing along with him, singing our hearts out, screaming, dancing. And it is so joyous. And everybody, it was so funny. It was my first time at the Tacoma Dome, having lived here for a very long time. And I didn't realize like how far away parking was. And we also didn't know how to get from the very far away parking to the venue itself. But then we started seeing all these feather boa feathers. And we just followed the feather boa feathers to the Elton John show. And I thought, this is perfect. So the arts bring community together. There's all these examples, like when choirs sing together, their heart rates actually sync up. Mm-hmm. If you want to build community, if you do arts-based learning together and you teach people how to silently witness each other's art, they get to know each other and love each other in such a different way than if you showed someone your math scores. It doesn't make you love them. But when you all share your masks, suddenly you're invested in this person. You're connected. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and performing music together as well as a community, whether it's just improv, like here are some drums, let's all do something, or you're part of a group of people. It's a nonverbal experience. Like it's the euphoria that I have experienced while being in sync, and it's always shared. Is interesting. It's like I'll be euphoric and I can tell, and we might even say afterwards, like, "Oh my God, what was that?" To feel that feeling, there's no way to get that feeling any other way other than through joint musical expressions that are enhancing each other, you know.
And every culture has a drum, right? And if you bring in drumming into a situation, you know, everyone starts to feel on this rhythm. And it's really, even something as simple as that is really transformative. Mm-hmm. I've been noticing that more in therapist circles when we're doing any kind of reflection. Often the facilitators will bring out a drum and kind of like it's akin to a meditation practice, and like just, you know, I think they're kind of setting this heartbeat when we've been so disconnected that something like a drum will bring people together, all the way to the like extreme side, like with Seattle soccer has its own drum corps. And back in the day when I worked in Pioneer Square, they would meet about a mile from the venue and start drumming and gathering fans. And this huge horde would, you know, I mean, it was just instant community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Asterisk, the only time I've been at the Tacoma Dome, I believe, was when I was a senior in high school, and my mom's friend paid me and my friend to wait in line at the Tacoma Dome for Michael Jackson tickets.
Oh, wow.
In 1989. So this is probably like the bad tour, mm-hmm. I'm guessing. And
so Sheryl Crow would have been a backup singer on that tour.
Oh, okay. And she paid us, I think, $50 each, Whoa. If not 25. And I remember being like, sucker, I would have done it for 10. You know what I mean?
And so you got tickets to the show?
No, we didn't. No, of course not. They, you know, that was the whole point. Like, you could not get these tickets. This is before Ticketmaster.
Oh, yeah.
You had to actually go to the booth.
There was a whole science of waiting in line, and that was part of the culture.
Yeah, yeah. The role of art in personal relationships.
Well, it's hard to be in relationships with people that don't like the same arts that you like. So people tend to find each other. Hold on one second. Very uncomfortable. All of a sudden.
Yeah, get comfy. And the new comfy.
It's not the chair's fault. It's me. People tend to find each other based on interests, musical interests. You know, do you like the same movies? Do you like the same TV? Do you like the same fashion? These are things that tend to draw us together. It also can be big fights in relationships. You think about the art in your home. If somebody puts up something that you don't like, you know, that's real hard to get over.
Mm-hmm. And the final one, the role of art in your life.
Oh. Well, I'm very, very lucky, and I am an outlier, especially in American culture, in that I grew up in an artistic household. My father has a master's degree in theater direction, and my mother has a PhD minus the D in Irish literature. Her sister is an amazing ceramicist and fiber artist. And so I grew up thinking that adults were really fun and made a ton of art. And it was only when I became an adult that I desperately was searching, where are the fun adults? And I also grew up in one of the most artistic times in history. I mean, I was in San Francisco in the 70s, which was like, there was free theater in the streets with the San Francisco Mime Troupe who are still performing. Like, there was just music and art kind of everywhere. And so I rely on the arts for my mental health. I am a big arts goer. The next thing I'm going to go see is David Sedaris, who I think is like the funniest person on the planet. I quote him all the time. That was probably one of the hardest parts of the pandemic for me, is I rely on arts events for my own mental health. Mm-hmm. After that, we've got, if it's coming to your town, you have to go see it. Kiki and Herb are reviving their blasphemous Christmas show, which is not to be missed. So I need the arts to survive. If there were no arts, I'd be super, super sad. I just had an 1.5-hour conversation with my dad where he went through all of his records. We were on the phone, and I picked, he said it's a 3-foot stack of records that he's going to send to me. But I was thinking, like, this might be the biggest gift he ever gives me. At 82, I'm going to get a large portion of his record collection, and I can put on his records, which would be like having a conversation with him.
Yeah.
And I learned a ton about him.
Yeah.
Not only is he one of the great thinkers about Shakespeare in our country, but I never knew this. He collected middle-aged music. He collected the music of the time as well. And so he's mentioning all of these music of the Middle Ages. And I was like, Dad, why do you have this? And he goes, well, to understand Shakespeare, I had to build the full world around it. And then the music was part of that. And then he would have these recordings of famous actors of the 50s and 60s doing Shakespearean sonnets and vignettes from plays. And then the best part was he would then launch into like a 5-minute Hamlet soliloquy. I wish I'd recorded the conversation. It was real special. And that is all art space. That is, and
the feeling of holding the record and the sleeve and the cover and the smell, I feel like records and the covers absorb the air and the essence of the individuals who used them or lived by them for so many years.
Well, and he said, not all of these are in perfect shape. And I was like, Dad, but that's the way I heard it as a kid, with the pop and the skip. And like, I don't know that song without the pop and the skip. So yeah, it's super funny. My sister-in-law, I joke, she always saves up her gay questions for me. She always has. I'm sure she has other gay friends, but like for years, every time she would get together, she had some question about gay culture, and I would always try and like answer really respectfully. And one time she asked me a question about drag, and I was like, bitch, this is on. Like, I went off for 3 hours to the point where people were begging me to shut up. But I was like, no, like, drag is everything. Drag is performance. Drag is activism. Drag is gender exploration. So I was just going on and on and on, because it's one of the most amazing art forms out there. But it was super funny. She didn't ask me any more gay questions after that.
I have a gay question for you.
What's that?
Have you seen Bros with Billy Eichner?
I want to go see it with you.
Oh, sorry. I saw it without you.
God, I asked you to see it
with
me.
Well, but I didn't know we were committing to that because we had planned on maybe...
Seattle person, super flaky. Anyways, tell me, what did you think of Bros? I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, well, sorry. I thought... Well, so we had made that plan maybe to see it for after we went to the last estate sale we went to. And I was like, I can't. And to me, I thought I was releasing you to see it on your own. But to you, you thought we were still beholden to each other about it. That sucks. Sorry. I liked it. Yeah. I mean, is two things. One, it's very clearly, and Billy Eichner, if fan of his, he is a big time lover of a lot of mainstream art, Broadway, and he loves rom-coms and stuff. So it definitely is trying to be a very mainstream rom-com. Also, it has a lot packed in about gay people and trans people, and a lot of commentary, a lot of realism that is often left out of more mainstream depictions of gay men. He just heads right into things and doesn't apologize for it, and doesn't soften it, doesn't try to make it more palatable, doesn't try to fit. And there's this direct commentary around that, because his character is, the whole story arc is he's trying to get his LGBTQ museum off the ground in New York. And there's all these pressures. It's like, well, we got to appeal to people, otherwise no one's going to come in. And so there's this whole debate about, like, we've been doing that for years, and I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to stick it in people's faces, and they're just going to have to deal with it. And so the movie kind of rides that line as well, but swings wildly back and forth. Really, it doesn't just play it safe. There's a lot of things in there that are not. And so, because it's produced by what's his face, who made 40-Year-Old Version. I can't remember his name. Judd Apatow. And so he didn't direct it, but he produced it. And so it has all the bells and whistles of a major blockbuster, but it didn't do that well. And
it was too gay.
Yeah. And so what Billy Eichner was saying was that he had hoped that America would want to see a good movie, a rom-com, and it just happens to be about gay people. Big deal. Let's go see it. But he was let down. He said, well, not enough straight people went to see this movie, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to have a huge blockbuster is if straight people go. So he was, I don't know his attitude, but he seemed disappointed. But I think it did fairly well. I mean, and I liked it. I thought it wasn't amazing. It's not like the best movie I've ever seen, but it's a fun rom-com, fun, interesting rom-com, and I cried, and it has all the moments. And Billy Eichner, I just love him. I watch everything that he does.
He runs like the gayest man in America. I was very surprised.
He runs what?
Because I've only ever seen him standing still, and there was some point in the movie where he runs, and I was like, oh my God, that man is so gay. Look at the way he's running.
Well, have you seen Billy on the Street?
Hey, does he ever run? Yeah. I've never seen an episode where he
trots,
runs.
He'll sort of trot down the sidewalk trying to catch someone. So sorry for going without you. I'll go again.
It's okay. We'll find something else.
Yeah.
Wakanda,
yeah. We'll see that together. Wait, are we committing to seeing this together?
I don't want to.
Okay, we got to be more clear on this.
And you're,
because I don't want to get set up expectations, but I also do want to go to a movie with you.
I feel like estate sales are just clearer for us.
Yeah,
like, movies are somehow too complicated, but I feel like estate sales we have more follow through. It's just real. Real clear. Stay in this zone. Stay where it's safe.
Well, for me, the scheduling of a movie is harder because I work so much that it's hard for me to get away for that amount of time. But for estate sales, I'm not usually working on a Friday or Saturday morning, right? Or I don't have to work on a Friday or Saturday morning. So it's really easy for me to work. And Stacy usually doesn't have anything that she that we're doing together Friday or Saturday morning. So it's a very easy time for me to do that.
I feel like we're damaged though by the last estate sale where we had to wait an hour to get in. I feel like
no, that was good. Joy. We had a chance to talk. I think we waited long. I think I waited like an hour and 45 minutes because I was there pretty early.
And we met some other people. We had some interesting conversations.
I saw an old friend.
Yeah.
But so I'll tell you because originally we started going to, I heard you talking about estate sales and it appealed to me. And then I started thinking about records and then I started going. And
now you've moved on. You have a new.
I still like estate sales, but there was a time there for a few months where I was depending on estate sales for records. But I have now gone on to a second phase of my music purchasing life that I'm I'm being more selective because, you know, when you go to a estate sale,
Whatever.
it can be kind of deceptive because, one, if you're waiting an hour and a half just to get inside, you kind of have that Black Thursday or Black Friday mentality of just like, okay, you're in, you know, buy shit. And I end up buying stuff and spending more money, honestly, that it's not a huge deal, but, so if I do go to estate sales in the future, I have to kind of remind myself, like, you know, if you see something because we've been to estate sales where I would see a record, I'd be like, oh my God, I need this record. And I just want to be more selective. And maybe I go to an estate sale and there aren't any records, but sometimes there's a little figurine of a dog or a cat or a bird that I buy or a bull. And I think I just have to be more normal because I feel like a lot of people when they go to the estate sales,
people are hyped.
But they're hyped, but they also aren't afraid to walk away without buying anything. I feel like
there's different. Some people come for the purchasing experience. Some people come for the voyeuristic. Like that last estate sale we went to, the person had an unbelievable collection of like 80s posters of bikini-clad women on cars or with beer bottles.
All right.
And I was already done, but you were looking through every record, and I was just sitting in this, like, true man cave, staring at all these outrageous posters, like, just kind of having a moment. And then sitting on the floor were these 3 pieces of wicker luggage, a matching set of wicker luggage, which I was like, those are an easy pass for me. But this one guy came in and he was like, these are amazing. And we had this whole conversation about this wicker luggage, and he took the set. So, you know, I mean, it's kind of, you enter into this strange world that is totally temporal, will never exist again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a guy in Seattle who was an antique dealer. And it's the snootiest estate sale company in Seattle. They have a whole system that's like super archaic to get in. And they've done 3 sales of his stuff because he lived in this teeny tiny house and he had so much stuff. And I got one item at the last estate sale. This gorgeous but damaged, but still has a story to tell, North African inlaid table. And I promised myself I would get nothing more from this estate sale because it's like such a hassle. And then this print came up of San Francisco in the mid 1800s. It's and I'm like, oh my God, I have to get it.
Oh, yeah. So you said something earlier that I wanted to ask you about. So Invasion of the Bodysnatchers in the 70s in San Francisco. When you watch that movie, I've
never watched it.
Oh.
I can't do real scary.
It's not super scary, especially for
Maybe
the first...
we'll watch it together.
Okay. But it's kind of frightening.
But I remember like the lore of it, like pods, and like you open a thing and there's your pod is growing in there. Yeah.
For a long period of time, it feels more like a cult movie, or a cult is developing, like brainwashing is kind of, anyway. But the vibe of that movie feels very 1975 San Francisco, and I would be curious as to whether, maybe watch the first, like literally just the first 20 minutes to get a feel if it feels accurate to you, because it has a very particular vibe.
So for me, the movie that catches the vibe of my childhood is Harold and Maude, because there's no cars in San Francisco and you can just fly all around, and there's all these weird natural spaces and
weird kind of
Maude
hippie-ish
is like
people.
The classic, like, you know, 80 but 20 at heart, you know, Holocaust survivor. Like, those are the people of my childhood.
I love that movie. I love that movie. I saw it when I was a kid. As I was watching it, I'm like, I don't think I'm supposed to be watching this movie, because the kid is constantly trying to act like he's killed himself. And there's all these gruesome scenes that he sets up. I think the movie starts with him in a scene like that where there's blood everywhere, and he's trying to get attention, or he's angry at his mom or something. And I find that movie still to just be amazing. I have the soundtrack. I think I got the soundtrack at one of the estate sales we went to, and I have a poster of it in my bedroom.
But that vibe, like anything is possible, magic is possible, that's the childhood I grew up in. That adults, she's a classic adult that I would know. Of like, adults are super fun. God, I remember like after college and I got my first job at AAA and I was working like in the call center and I was like, ooh, adults are not fun. Like what? I felt like it was like, wait a second, this is adult life? This is horrible.
Yeah.
And that's where gay culture came in for me. So I was like, oh, drag shows, like drag, theater, AIDS activism. I was like, oh, here's the fun stuff.
Yeah. If you're a bit younger, you might have become a Burning Man person.
Yes. And in fact, a friend of mine, the most Burning Man person I knew who's passed away over 10 years ago now, invited me to go down to Burning Man with like our sleeping bags and his shitty car. And I passed up on it and I regret it to this day.
When I've hung out with, in fact, that woman I ran into at the estate sale was from that group of friends I had 10 or 15 years ago who were, it was a whole troop of burners who would band together and go together and party together and plan together and, you know, and support each other. You know, there's just these little troops of like 25 to 40 people that plan, you know, they go together anyway. And so when they would invite
camps.
Okay. Camps. They would invite me to their parties at these exclusive, like local burner parties. And I marveled at how the emotional vibe of everybody and the freedom and the acceptance and the love. And so I hung out with them a lot. I mean, there are other aspects to it that were not for me. There were a lot of naked orgies that's just not for me. I mean, each to their own, but I was, anyway, point is, they were nice people. And one of the very first podcast episodes I ever did was I had them on the podcast, a few of them that were close to me, including her, actually, now that I think about it. And in the episode, I had planned it, and this might have been like the 10th episode I ever made, and I had no idea what I was doing until maybe 10 years in, so I really had no idea what I was doing then. And I invited them over to my house to record, and it was in the morning, because I think it was the only time I could get them all on the same page. And they showed up, and it was a video podcast at the time, and they showed up in all their burner kind of weird outfits, you know. And, you know, they sit down and I'm used to them at 3:30 in the morning while there's a DJ and everyone's half naked and everyone is, you know, in these cuddle puddles and everyone's happy and, you know, probably drugged up on something. I don't know. But in this morning environment on a Tuesday in Seattle when it's like raining outside and they come into my house and they're not exactly comfortable and I'm trying to interview them and I'm trying to get at, because I wanted to share with, you know, the internet, at least from my perspective, their culture and their emotional health, really. And it was so stunted of an interview. Like
there was no magic.
Yeah.
¿Dónde está las magic?
And I remember being really, that episode was taken down soon after. I'm pretty sure I published it, but I mean, again, nice people, great people, but that was one of the moments where I learned, like, not every interviewee or interview situation is the same. If I had gone to one of their parties, now that I think about it, and just went around with a microphone and a handheld camera, like, I would have had a much better time capturing what I was trying to capture, you know? Anyway, so maybe I had a little minor experience with your childhood of freedom and expression and art and acceptance and love and drugs as well. All right. Well, that does it for that episode. Thanks, Soft Noodles, for sending in your questions for Rebecca, and everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
we want to see what art you make.